Well, good day. This is Iron Horse here, and welcome to my channel. Here I discuss everything flat Earth, logical and logical. So today's lesson is going to be about flight. Now, when I first got into flat Earth, I'll be honest. When I first got into flat Earth, I was quite naive. What I thought I would do is just play with theories, which is exactly what I did. My very first theory that I came up with as one of the potential possibilities, which I just played out, was to hold a plate in my hand. It was actually a cheese platter with a dome over it. And what I suggested is if I lit a lighter above it, that would represent the sun. And as the cheese platter rotated, like a vinyl record, the vinyl disc on a record player, North Pole in the centre, sort of stationary, and as the Earth slowly spun beneath it once every 24 hours, that could create the illusion of day and night. Now, I'll admit, I was very naive back then. That was my very first introduction to flat Earth, and I was wrong. But that's what I do, is I come up with hypotheses that I propose because it sort of makes some sort of logical sense to me at the time, and then I put it out there, and then eventually I get shown how wrong I am. When you can't show me that I'm wrong, then that's where the hypothesis stands. It stands as a possible current best theory. So that's what I do. So I'm going to talk about flight. In fact, I'll use the whiteboard in a minute. I still have to erase it, so it's still there from the last video. That's how often I use it. I don't use it a lot. My very first thing, though, when it came to flight above the Earth and how people kept saying how the aeroplane should have to dip its nose to follow the curve, is I instantly jumped on that. And this is the problem with the flat Earth, is that most people only see through one eye. However, I see through both eyes. And I immediately thought, well, how could that also work for the globe? So everything that we've believed in for the globe for all this time has obviously stood the test of time because it worked or seemed to work, or people just didn't think about it. And flight was a very good example, because as soon as we're told, well, if you start flying straight on a level plane as you're flying across a curved surface, you're going to fly off out into space. So I've got several steel man arguments for the globe, which I will describe, and then I'll explain how it can only work on the stationary plane of Earth. So 2 seconds, I'll clear the whiteboard and we'll get into it. Right, so first and foremost, I hope that everybody by now understands how difficult it is to do anything to scale, whether it be globe or flat. On both, if I did a 1 millimeter, the size of that, that would be the height of a person standing looking at the horizon. I'd have to have a whiteboard that's about 1 meter. I'd have to have it 3 meters away, so to the edge of the wall over there. That would be the sort of scale we need for a 1 millimeter high person. So we're going to do everything completely out of scale, just to make it simple so you can understand. So we'll just assume that this here is the curve of the Earth. It's not very curvy, it's actually a bit flat on top, but it's always flat on top. No matter where you are, it's always flat on top, so that's pretty stock standard. So let's say an aeroplane takes off from here, and this is his cruising height of, we'll just call it 30,000 feet. We could, in fact, call that 9,990 meters, but we'll just leave it in feet for now. So then we'll say that the next one there is 60, and then the next one would be 90. Okay, so this is simplifying it down for everybody. So when an aeroplane takes off from the surface and reaches cruising altitude, from here, what he's doing is he's supplying sufficient thrust the entire time. So this works for the globe. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's just pretend it's not moving whatsoever. It's not moving twice the speed of the aeroplane from the west to the east. And it's not moving 10 times faster than a railgun projectile to orbit the sun, 66,600 miles per hour. We'll just pretend that the Earth is stationary and that plane is the only thing that's moving around a globular sphere, an oblate spheroid. So once it reaches the cruising speed, right, so this is, geez, I don't even know if I can even draw an aeroplane these days. We'll put its wing there, its nose out there, and tail there, whatever. So you sort of get the impression as it's thrusting, right, so the thrust is coming out your engines, which are actually in front of the wings these days, thanks to Nelson Mandela. So the thrust is pushing out here, which gives lift under the wings up that way. But gravity, according to the GLERF module, is pulling the plane down this way or this way. So basically what's happening is that once it reaches cruising altitude, the plane is constantly dropping, but at the same time putting sufficient thrust in to maintain the altitude at that particular speed it's going. So technically speaking, it doesn't have to nose down to keep dropping at the same speed that it's thrusting upwards. And I've put this thing in there that does do this 3 degrees upward thrust, which isn't a lot, but that also accounts for the fact that the wings now are angled in such a way, because what they found with earlier planes, you sort of have your wings there and you're flying straight, that as you're thrusting through the air, what tends to happen is the plane starts to, what they call porpoise through the air, and it makes people very airsick. So what they found is if you angle the wings just back slightly, but put the nose up by that 3 degrees, it stops that from happening. So just planes above plane, and you don't have that so much turbulence and air sickness and that sort of thing. So that's the reason why it noses up to 3 degrees. But you can still, for the globe, for the sake of the argument, it's only 8 inches in a mile, and a mile is a great amount of distance, and 8 inches is like nothing, especially for a globe. And let's not go there. So it's really not dropping, it's just dropping sufficiently as much as it's thrusting upwards, so it can work for the globe. So we have to give them the benefit of the doubt. And then the next one, where we also give them some benefit of the doubt, is that at 30,000 feet, the air starts to get quite rarefied to the point where if the aeroplane lost cabin pressure, because it's pressurized, it's sealed, and they are actually putting air into it, if it loses that seal, then they drop oxygen masks from the ceiling and everybody puts their oxygen mask on. So it assists them to breathe. It's not a life or death situation, generally speaking, at 30,000 feet. Once you get 40, 45, 50,000 feet, it starts to become a serious life and death situation. If you think about it, Mount Everest is only 5.4 miles high, and that's, I think, roughly 30, 33,000 feet anyway. But because you're doing strenuous activity, that's the reason why you need the oxygen mask if you're climbing Mount Everest. So, you're just sitting there chilling out. You're probably going to sleep better because of oxygen deprivation anyway. And then when you get it back into you and you come back to, you're like, oh man, I slept like that. So the oxygen thing isn't the main thing. What it is about the air pressure. And so actually, as the plane gets higher to 60,000 feet, that's the sort of height where a fighter jet pilot, I'm going to think of the words here for a second, where somebody flying a fighter jet at 60,000 feet and above, they have to be wearing a pressure suit, and they've absolutely got their mask on with the full helmet and sealed pressure suit. So the whole body is kept under pressure so that the blood keeps circulating. because that's one of the things that, most people think, oh, we can just go to space. No, you can't. Once you reach a certain lack of pressure, the fluids of your body themselves want to boil. You can do that in the classroom with your simple vacuum, chamber test. I think we used to use a glass bell or something on a rubber mat, and then you have a pump suck the air out, and the beaker of water inside of it starts to boil at room temperature. That's because of pressure. It's the air pressure that keeps water liquid. And because we're about 80% water, we need that pressure to stay that way. This is vitally important. But let's get back to the topic, is once they get to about 90,000 feet, the biggest and greatest and fastest planes can go no further because the air itself is too rarefied to give lift beneath the wings and also to thrust air through the turbines. A bit of both, plus you also lose that thing where you need to dissipate the heat. That's another thing that most people don't even really think about when they think, oh, a rocket or a jet and all that sort of stuff can just keep on going and going and going, is you need air to dissipate the heat. You've got nothing. That's why a vacuum flask is so effective. Your little thing you put your coffee in or whatever in the mornings, it's so effective because that little vacuum sealed chamber around it cannot displace heat or cold for that matter. Either way, it'll keep your drink hot or cold, whatever you put into it in the first place, because there's nothing to displace the heat. So you've lost your heat displacement, you've lost the means to thrust, you've lost the means to give lift, you've lost the means to steer, and you've lost the means to brake. And that's a big one for the moon landers who still think we could take off in a rocket to the moon. How are you going to brake? You can't put out a parachute. You can't steer. You can't thrust. What are you going to do? Just do a skid 60 blast against the moon and hope you slow down enough so that you can land on this thing going 2,280 miles per hour around the Earth. So, anyway, my point of that is that the plane itself cannot go higher than that anyway. So even if the flat Earth hypothesis that you're going to fly off into space, you won't. Technically, you would and you should, but practically, you can't and you won't. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to nose down because you're staying on a plane. You don't have to nose down because you're only thrusting as much as you're dropping. And you cannot go a certain height, so it doesn't matter. Even if you tried to keep going off into space, it won't let you. So that's today's lesson. Cannot go to space, have never been to space, never can, never will. I'm a High Norse, and thanks for watching.